Hi and welcome to Christchurch. My name is Claire and it's really great that you have come and joined us for our kids' online church service today. Now, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to all of you who sent in your pictures and video clips of the fun that you had in the snow the other week. It's really great to be able to share with each and every one of us what people are getting up to. So do please remember that you can send in any pictures or videos of the things that you have been doing and the fun that you've been having so that we can share it together as a church family. Now, last week we were learning about Solomon, who built a temple for God. And this week we're going to be talking about two guys that came in the Bible after Solomon. And we're actually going to be talking about some of God's messengers. And some of these messengers were called prophets. Now, a prophet is someone who hears from God and then goes and tells other people what God is saying. Now, today we're going to be looking and hearing about Elijah and Josiah. Now, they are names that you have probably heard of before, but you may not know that much about them. And that's okay, because we're going to be looking at them today. So you're going to hear all about them. Now, Elijah and Josiah both lived in a time when Israel had been divided and separated. And the people had fought and had forgotten about God. And they were worshipping false idols. Now, an idol can be anything that distracts your attention away from God. And that may be money or even sometimes people. Now, let's head over to Sam, who's going to tell us a bit more about Elijah and Josiah.
Thanks, Claire. Today we're talking about messengers. Messengers are people who bring God's message from God to the rest of God's people. Sometimes we call them prophets. Now, today we are talking about a prophet and a king. And you can find the videos for these stories on our website or on this website here. We are talking about Elijah to start with. So, Elijah was an advisor to a king, and this was about 100 years after Solomon, and people had forgotten about God. Israel was in a bit of a mess. Elijah tried to speak to King Ahab about God, but King Ahab was worshipping false gods and idols like Baal and didn't want to listen. God told Elijah that there wouldn't be any rain for 3 years. That's a really long time. And because there was no rain, no crops would grow. There wasn't even any dew on the ground. Now, King Ahab didn't listen to Elijah and continued to pray to Baal for rain. Well, that didn't work. After 3 years, Elijah returned and challenged King Ahab to a contest. So together they went up to the top of a mountain and built an altar to their God. And they both prayed. First, they prayed that the altar would be set on fire. King Ahab prayed and prayed, but nothing happened. But when Elijah prayed, the fire burned so great it burned the altar and the area around it. They then prayed for rain, and when Elijah prayed to God for rain, it rained. After 3 long years, it rained and it rained. This made King Ahab and his wife Jezebel really angry, and they wanted to hurt Elijah. So Elijah ran away. God spoke to Elijah in a whisper. And Elijah was protected from King Ahab and from Jezebel, and he didn't die. In fact, Elijah was so special that he didn't die at all. He rose to heaven in a chariot of fire. Around 150 years later, we reach the time of Josiah. Josiah became king when he was really young. and a lot of Israel had forgotten about God again. They were worshipping idols. Josiah learned about God and built a temple to be able to worship him. In the temple, one of the priests found the book of the law. A prophet called Huldah helped Josiah understand what he should do, because Josiah was so sad to find out that he and the people of Israel hadn't been following the rules. Josiah read the book of the law to the people, and because he was king, the people wanted to be just like him, so they listened. Josiah collected and burned all of the idols from his kingdom.
Thanks, Sam. Now, I've got some questions to help you think about the stories we've heard about today. Elijah called people to follow God with all of their hearts. If Elijah were around today, what do you think he would warn us against? Elijah got scared and ran away, but God looked after him. How do you think God looks after us? Today we learned about Josiah and how he learned more about God from a book. When you have learned more about the Bible, have you ever learned anything that made you think you should change the way you behave? Josiah had help to understand what the book of the law was telling him. If you need help understanding something you have read in the Bible, who can you ask for help?
So today we learned about a time when God spoke to Elijah in a whisper. Now, I don't know about you, but before God whispered to Elijah, there had been the wind, there had been an earthquake, and there'd even been fire. And they were really big things. But God chose to speak to Elijah in a whisper. Now, sometimes we may want God to speak to us in the really big things, but often he chooses to speak in a quiet way to each and every one of us. Now, that doesn't always mean that we will hear an actual whisper voice. Sometimes God might speak to us by putting in our minds a person maybe to pray for or to give a call to. Or maybe there may even be a Bible verse or a passage that comes to mind that you then need to maybe go and check out and read. Maybe God might speak to you by giving you a picture, or maybe God might speak to you in a way that you just get a real sense and a feeling that you need to do something. These are all ways that God can speak to each and every one of us today. But sometimes things can be a bit too noisy around us, so it can distract us and we can't always hear from God. So today, as we pray, you are just going to spend some time with God and you're going to be quiet. Now, being quiet can sometimes be really tricky, but it is worth giving it a go and seeing if you can hear from God. Now, you might want to get comfortable, you might want to go and sit on a chair, you may want to lay on the floor, or you might even want to lay on your bed. You may want to be in a room with other people around, or you may want to take yourself to a room by yourself. So once you've found a place to get comfortable, just spend some time thinking about God and see what God has got to say to you. Now, you can either pause the video now or spend some quiet time with God a bit later on today. But I'd really encourage you, after you've spent some quiet time with God, to talk to the people in your home and share anything that you think that God spoke to you about today. But even if you don't think that God said anything to you today, don't worry, keep trying it. But talk to the adults in your home, because I know that they would be able to share times that God has spoken to them. And you can be encouraged that God does speak today, even if it's in that quiet whisper. Enjoy spending some quiet time with God.
Hi everyone! Today we've learned about Elijah, who was a messenger. He heard God's message and then he passed that message on to God's people. Maybe during this week you've learned about other messengers that God used to pass on his message to his people. Or maybe you already know about some of the messengers from Bible stories that you've read in the past. God uses lots of different people, doesn't he? And that got me thinking about a game that we could play today. It's called Guess Who. Now on the screen there's going to be lots of different faces, and I'm going to describe one of those faces to you. And you've got to try and work out who I'm describing from the clues that I'm going to give you. Let's give it a go, shall we?
The person I've chosen is a man. He is wearing a blue top. He's also wearing glasses. He has ginger hair.
Did you work out who I was describing? It was Antonio. If you've got this game at home, why not play it together now? Or if you haven't got it, then you can use the version that we've just been using. It'll be on the church website under the Children's Activities area. Remember, although God uses lots of different people, there's just one voice, and that's God's. It's challenge time. Hopefully you had fun last week searching for golden and shiny objects. Remember, we were learning about the temple that Solomon built for God, and inside that temple there was a lot of gold. Well, this week we've been learning about messengers, haven't we? People who passed on a message they learned from God to others around them. And we want you to learn an interesting fact and then share it with us, please. You can do so by emailing your interesting fact to media@christchurchwgc.org.uk. Please remember to ask an adult to help you. And do make them really interesting, because we want to learn lots of new things this week, please. Now, as usual, I've got one more challenge I want to leave with you. It can be really hard to share our faith with those around us, and it can feel a bit scary sometimes. But your challenge this week is to not be afraid and to just share something simple about your faith with someone this week. It can be really simple, like how you've done church this weekend. See you next week. I'm going to hand over to Sam now. Bye.
Today we were talking about messengers. So we're going to go ahead and add our pieces to our line. It's getting quite long now. I'm going to go off the screen, I think. We had Elijah was the first story from today. And then Jonah is also on the website. This one. Josiah, that was the second story we looked at today. And on the website there is another one which tells you more about some other prophets. So go ahead and check out the website if you haven't managed to look at those other ones already. And we look forward to seeing you next week. Next week we'll be looking at the exile section, and we will be focusing on the story of Nehemiah. So if you have already looked at all these stories throughout the week, if you want to, you could go ahead to the website and find out more about some of the other stories ready for next week.